All right, so today in this video, we're going to be talking about text files and how to write to them, read from them in Java. Now, we're going to first start with writing to files, so writing to text files. All right, so what we're going to need first is a print writer object. And within that, we're going to need a couple other things, but we're going to start with just what is the print writer object and what can it do. So the print writer object is basically a way for us to write to files in a way very similar to how we would write output to a console or to any other kind of output stream. We have three main functions. We have print, printf, and print line. So you may not have seen printf yet. Printf is a format print for Java. You can use it to the system.out, so you do system.out.printf, but we mostly use that print and print line for what we're doing. So the print just means we don't add a new line character at the end of it. A print line means we do, right? So the next thing we need, because that's pretty straightforward, right? We have a print writer object. It does those things. We put in our strings like normal into those functions. The next thing we need, though, is we need to be able to open a file. And in order to do that, we need a file output stream. All right, so file output stream. And to do the file output stream, we're going to need a try catch. We're going to go over what that looks like. And we're also going to need to catch a specific type of exception. Now, we'll go over the fact that there's technically 3 different ways we can catch it, but we're going to try to be as specific as possible, follow good practices with it. And we're going to just go through this example as we go. So this file output stream is what we use to get our file object. So here we're going to start with a program where we have a print writer. Start over here. Let's use some yellow so that it stands out a little bit more against all the other text I've been writing. So print writer, because we need that object, right? And we're going to just call this a OS or output stream. That's just what I'm going to use. So output stream, and we're going to actually instantiate it to null. And the reason we're going to instantiate it to null and not go ahead and give it a file output stream and instantiate a new print writer object is because we need that try catch. So we're going to go ahead and start that try catch. Right, so we have our try. And what we're going to do next here is we're going to go ahead and try to instantiate our object. So we're going to try to instantiate our object. We have OS. I don't like that it made that into an automatic circle. We want it in as a letter, not a circle. So we have OS. We're going to say equals new, because this is what we use whenever we need a new object. We use the new keyword. We're going to do a print writer, because that's the type of object we have. Now, this is the part where it gets a little bit trickier. Now, we're not just going to do a print writer. We're going to put something inside this print writer instantiation, and that is that new file output stream. So we're just going to instantiate what we would call an anonymous object. It's not being stored anywhere. So we're going to do new file. Oh, it thinks I wanted a square. Let's start this over here. A new file output stream. Now, in here, we're going to give it the name of a file we want to open. And now this isn't necessarily going to open that file. This is usually going to create that file, at least how we're going to use it for now. So we're just going to call it out. Oh, .txt. Now, I want to note that the file extension here isn't really that important. Okay, so this txt right here isn't super important. That txt is really just us saying to ourselves that this is a text file. If we don't put the txt, the program is going to operate on it the exact same way. It's not going to give a crap. It's going to continue to operate as if it's a text file because it is a text file and it knows that. The .txt and any other extension that you ever find in any system is mostly for the consumer. It's for us as people, not for computers. That extension also allows us to say what type of programs can open up that particular type of file. So in this case, we're basically saying things like Notepad can open up that txt file and read it. Again, it doesn't really matter if we put that .txt on it. We can use whatever extension we want. We can use an arbitrary extension. We could use .jpg. We could use .ls. It doesn't matter. This is just an example of us doing it in a proper way because we care about things being text files, because text files are what we're used to using. All right. So it's a .txt for our purposes. And we're just going to go ahead and close that try block there. We don't need to put anything else into the try block. We just need that one line because that's the only thing that might fail. So the next thing we need to do is we need to catch our exception. Now, there's a couple different things we can do here. We can do an exception as the most generic kind, exception E, right? So if we do exception E, that's fine. But we're not going to get a lot of information about what type of exception we're catching and what exactly the problem is. So we're not going to do that. Nope. The next thing we could do is we could do a, let me see what it's called again. It is a, I think it's an IO exception. Yeah, so technically we could do, instead of an exception, we could go a little bit more specific and we could call it an IO exception. All right, well, that's better. It tells us a little bit more about what's happening, but it's not, again, specific to what's happening here. There's actually one more specific level of exception we can catch, which is the only type of exception that can really get thrown here. And that is a file not found exception. So the file not found exception. It's a really long exception name for me to have to write out there. Ooh. And we're just going to call it E still because that's what I do. And then we're going to open up that catch block. All right, so we have a file not found exception. Now, what's important to note here is that file not found exception is not technically a file not found. It means that it either can't find the file or, in our case, it can't create the file. Now this out.txt file is going to get created in your program's directory, right? So it's not going to get created at the base level of anywhere in your system. So when you want to do this, you want to make sure that you're getting unique names, which should be pretty easy in your program directory. But if you start using a full path to somewhere outside of your program directory, you're going to want to make sure that you're not hitting something you might want to overwrite or not overwrite. So next, we're going to actually handle this exception. So what do we want to do if we can't find the file, or in our case, actually, we can't create the file? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to do something very, very simple. We're going to do system.out.println. And in here, we're just going to put error opening file. So whoever's using the program knows that there was a problem. And then we're just going to exit because we can't do anything. We can't write to our file, which is what this program's all about. So we don't actually want to do out. We're just going to do a system.exit here. And we're going to put in a 0. All right. And then we're going to close up that block. So that's how we open a file in order to start writing to it. This is not opening to read, this is opening to output. Remember that we have a file output stream object into that print writer. So this is an output file, not an input file. All right, so the next thing here we're going to do, we're going to actually write to it. In order to write to it, we are going to use the output stream, and we're just going to do a print line. We're going to say something like, this is our first time writing a file, so we're going to just say, this is my file. Nope. Let's fix that text there. My file. All right, so we have os.println, this is my file. And then we're going to print out another line. I like Java. I do not actually like Java. Java is not my preferred programming language. I much prefer Python, but we're in a Java class, so we like Java. All right, so next, we aren't done. We have to do two things before we can actually close our program successfully. And the first thing here is we want to do a flush. All right, so a flush means that we are going to force the output stream to actually write to the file. So all we're doing with these two statements here, these os.printlines. So what we're doing here, and I actually want this to turn into a nice little square like it did before. There we go. These two lines here, what they're doing is they are saying, hey, we need to write these at some point. Not right now, but at some point. This line down here, hold on. This line down here, the os.flush, says write them now. All right. So that's really helpful. That's really important to remember. You're going to need to do that os.flush. And then the next thing you need to do is an os.close. Now, technically, you don't need to do the os.close. Or, I'm sorry, you don't need to do the os.flush before you do an os.close. But we are doing it because it's good practice to remember that you need to do a flush in order to actually get the program to write what you told it to write. I really want this to turn into a square like we did up there. There we go. All right, so this one, what it actually ends up doing is it calls, oh, I want my green pen again. This calls flush, then closes the file. And don't worry if you can't really read this text. I always clean up the writing before sharing the whiteboard with you, so it should be readable when you get it on iLearn. All right, so we have that, and then at the end of this here, that's the end of the program, so we can just close it. We need a, theoretically, this is inside of a main loop somewhere, right? A main function, a main method. So you're gonna, close your brackets and everything, close out the program, because that's it, we're done. That is how we write to a text file. It's very straightforward. The other thing that you want to probably know how to do is you want to be able to append. So in order to append, we're going to come up over to the upper right-hand corner of this whiteboard here. In order to append, instead of doing that output stream and just the name of the file, right, we're going to do os dot, sorry, not dot, equals new, and then it's going to be a print writer still, right? So print writer. Now, instead of putting what we put in it before, I'm going to use pink text in here just so that it's a little bit different. Instead of using that new file output stream, we're still going to do that. We're still going to do, actually, since this is the same, we're going to go back to using that yellow text. This is still a new file output stream. If I can get all that in there. I can't, but we're going to deal with it. And then here, we're just going to open up our brackets down here. Right? All right, so we have a new file output stream, and then we are going to put in here, we're still going to put in the name of our file, which is out.txt. But in addition to doing that, we are going to add a comma, and then we're going to add true as a Boolean value here. All right, and then we're just going to close out all our parentheses, and there we go. So what this will do, instead of trying to create a new out.txt file, it's going to try to append to an existing out.txt file. So this is how we append. This here is append. All right, and the difference here is really this little bit. I'm going to change the color here. Let's change it to that pink I was mentioning to true. All right, so that's the only difference, to make sure that you can append instead of create and overwrite. If you don't do that comma true, it will try to create a new and overwrite whatever you already have. All right. So the next thing we're going to talk about in the next video is going to be reading, and reading using a scanner. And then we're going to have another video after that for reading from a buffered reader, and we'll talk about what the difference is between those two things in the next set of videos.